At home, 13-year-old Young was conducting a more long-term experiment upon his family.
So he'd put some poison in the Sunday joint, not eat that bit himself, watch what it did to his father, his stepmother, his sister, and make notes. So if stepmom, as she did, threw up after lunch, he'd say 2 grams makes her throw up.
The family suspected the enthusiastic chemist was to blame for their sickness. They believed he'd accidentally contaminated kitchen utensils he'd borrowed to carry out his school experiments. Little did they know their son was using them as human guinea pigs, and that his experiments were inspired by Britain's most popular crime author.
In 1961, Sir Graham would have been 14 during his first bout of poisonings. Agatha Christie published a novel called The Pale Horse, in which the poison that's used is this poison thallium. There's a very detailed technical quote in the Agatha Christie novel about thallium and its effects, which clearly was to him like reading a textbook.
My investigations have revealed that antimony and thallium aren't chemicals that can be easily purchased. I want to learn more about the poisons Young was using and the impact they could have if they were used on a human. A man who's agreed to help me is forensic scientist James Cleary.
Antimony is a very hard, brittle sort of metalloid, and it can be very easily powdered. So if you imagine, most people think of metal as very hard substances, it's going to be hard to absorb into the body. Whereas if you put that into very fine powder form, it can be very easily and very readily absorbed into the body. And once it's in the body, the problem with heavy metals is that they cannot be destroyed or broken down. And once it actually ends up in the tissue, it become locked, and it's actually very hard to get rid of it.
So James, what would be the effects then on a human being, on a body?
You end up with effects that might be distinguished as, say, a viral poisoning, like influenza. So you have like tummy upsets, sort of headaches, sweating, fever, that type of effect on an individual. As time goes on, one of the obvious effects is hair loss. So that's one big effect that you'll find with chronic poisoning, but usually if it's an acute poisoning, the effects are so strong and so quick that you sort of really die before you get the hair loss.
Bouts of sickness had become increasingly more common in the Young household, and the teenage poisoner had set his sights on one family member in particular.
Within his family, he's particularly going to concentrate on Molly, his stepmother. This is the stepmother he's hated from the age of 3. This is the stepmother who destroys his toy aeroplane collection. This is the stepmother whom he gives small doses of antimony to over a long period of time, some 12 months, so as to replicate the symptoms of gastroenteritis. So Molly's constantly in bad health with stomach problems.
So he took enormous pleasure then in watching his stepmother in agony, dying.
And of course, you're right. He's going to be sitting across the breakfast table, the lunch table, the dinner table, knowing full well that he's given his stepmother Molly a dose of antimony that's going to cause her major stomach problems. He's going to take pleasure out of the power that he knows that she's going to have an unpleasant evening, an unpleasant day. It's the sense in which he can control this environment that's interesting to me, because psychologically I think that's what he's been desperate for all his life. He's been desperate to have power and control over circumstances that he feels he has no power and control over. Through poisoning his family, he is able to establish that control.
The levels of sickness were becoming increasingly violent. On the evening of April the 21st, 1962, Graham's father, Fred, returned home to find his wife, Molly, writhing in agony in their garden. Comforting her, Fred spied a figure gazing down on them. It was Graham. He was motionless. It was as if he was watching an experiment. Molly was admitted to hospital, but her symptoms mystified the doctors. She told the staff that she just wanted to go home to make her family dinner. They were her last words. Just hours later, Molly Young was dead. The post-mortem stated that her cause of death was due to a collapsed bone at the top of her spinal column that she'd suffered a year earlier. They had no reason to suspect antimony. Graham Young had claimed his first life and got away with it. He was now on the lookout for his next unsuspecting victim for his deadly experiments.